Hello, welcome back to the Taiwanology podcast. This is your host, Kwangyin from Taiwan's CommonWealth magazine. So today we have a wonderful guest in our studio today, and I have to say that this is the third consecutive episode on Trump, President Trump, ever since he took office. Right, so today we are diving into a big question after the Liberation Day. What does the new America under Trump 2.0 represent, and what does it mean for Taiwan? This is a story that concerns all of us here. With President Trump's return, we're witnessing a renewed emphasis on tariffs, reshoring, and what he terms a great manufacturing renaissance. I'm doing air quotes here, even though we're on a podcast, you can't see me. But what does that mean in real terms? And how does a place like Taiwan, an export-driven democracy caught between China and the U.S., fit into that vision? Well, to explore this, we are joined by a perfect guest, someone who bridges East and West, politics and business. Jack Ho, he is the Chief Operating Officer of Universal Cement Corporation. He has just returned from a whirlwind trip to Boston and Harvard, reconnecting with old classmates and observing firsthand the shifts in the U.S. landscape. So welcome to the studio, Jack.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, good. So Jack, how can I introduce him? So he's my generation, I think 1980s.
Yeah, I wouldn't, try to guess everyone's age here, but I assume we're probably from the same generation.
Right. So I've known Jack for years, a very good source in everything ranging from industry to global affairs, because he studied political science and East Asian studies at Columbia and Harvard. He returned to Taiwan 16 years ago.
Yeah, something like that, 16 years ago.
Yeah, 16 years ago to help lead his family's cement business back to profitability. So I have to give you a round of applause for that.
Well, something completely unrelated to what I studied, yeah.
Right, and we will probably get to that later.
Sure.
And since then, he's really brought a rare blend of political insight and operational pragmatism to very real-world industry. So, okay, maybe we could start from why you studied East Asian studies and political science in the States. Why would you choose to study that?
When I was in college at Columbia, I also explored several possibilities, such as sociology, anthropology, etc. But at that point, and my parents also said, majoring in those, you may not have the best career path once you graduate. I mean, I'm not going to comment on what everyone think about it.
Humanities.
Yeah, but anyway, so I settled upon East Asian studies because, in particular, I had a strong liking for history and political science. So ultimately, there were a lot of overlap between poli-sci and East Asian studies. So yeah, I graduated with a double major. And after that, a lot of my contemporaries, back then, the finance industry was booming, which after a few years, it crashed and burned. But I never took a strong liking into finance. So I figured I'll give myself a few more years by going to graduate school.
Right.
But then as, things turned out, when I graduated from my master's degree, the market crashed. So, I returned home, and back then my family just started to took on the management of Universal Cement. So I figured I'll come back and help for a little bit. But
I think what you studied then, the East Asian studies and geopolitics, I think they come in pretty handy actually around this time. So
yeah, I mean, like we all know, business has a lot of similarity to politics. I mean, if you look at the current U.S. president right now, he's from the business world. So.
Right.
Yeah.
So that I think that's actually pretty useful at this point. So go back to where we started. You just returned last night from a trip to the U.S., to Boston,
and New York.
Harvard, and New York. Yeah. What's the mood right now?
I think compared to a few years ago, definitely there are a lot of angst and uncertainty. I mean, the word uncertainty is a word that you will see very often in the news these days. And I think it was definitely something the Trump administration has stressed. the president himself has said, if I tell you what I'm thinking, then that defeats the purpose of surprise, right? But going back to the mood on campus, there were definitely a lot of uncertainty and worry and concern because, they're facing threats from the administration for budget reduction, so they're worried too. This is the first time in a long time that they need to worry about how to, make ends meet, right? So, yeah, a lot of questions pervades the campus.
And it's Harvard. I mean, the richest university in the U.S. If they're under threat, then no one's safe.
Yeah, but to qualify that, Harvard indeed has, the most endowment of any U.S. colleges. But, a lot of these endowment, they have specific use. So when your budget is facing a sudden cut, is difficult to maneuver because a lot of their investments are also in long-term financial instruments. Right. So to a lot of their day-to-day operation, especially with regards to special projects that receive federal grants, is very difficult to all of a sudden trying to find another source of funding.
So I know still early days, but who do you think will win, Harvard or Trump?
I think it's a long negotiation process. I really don't want to comment so ostensibly, but from my perspective, the president of Harvard, Alan Garber, I believe he struck the right tone because, with in the business negotiation, it's not particularly wise to just accept a deal right away, right?
Yeah.
So,
be strong.
Yeah, so, he came out to say no first, and the administration then will deal his next card. So then they talk about further reduction in certain areas and then that area. So I think it is better to see what hands the administration is capable of dealing.
Let's see. Let's see what comes next.
Yeah.
Right. So with so much uncertainty, what are your friends making about them?
Well, with regards to the academia, they're worried because, there are also talks about that the administration is going to not issue visa to foreign students. And foreign students constitute, wherever they're from in the world, they constitute a large part of graduate studies and more so funding because most of them, if they can afford studying abroad, usually do not need financial aid. And most of the graduate student body are international students, such as myself. So, so there are a lot of questions with regards to that area. And
people in the business, how are they making up the uncertainty in?
Oh, you mean business? Yeah. That's another discussion altogether. But, with regards to what is going on, I think they are indeed the administration is indeed raising awareness into the reindustrialization and where the U.S. stands currently in the global supply chain. So we had a lot of in-depth discussion with regards to that area.
Right. Okay. Which we will address later on in the conversation. And do you notice any changes in how Americans are talking about manufacturing, trade, or Taiwan?
Well, if you're coming from the perspective of people finally talking about it. I wouldn't say 5 to 10 years ago, industrialization or the manufacturing is on top of anyone's mindset. And, there is an ongoing joke that whenever you talk about Taiwan, people will mistaken it as Thailand.
Right. Say, I think it still happens.
Yeah, I love Bangkok and I love Pad Thai. But I think with disregarding manufacturing, Taiwan has been on the map because of boba and xiaolongbao and Taiwanese snacks, but definitely not chips, right?
Yeah, so it's nowadays chips.
Yeah, so it's only because of COVID and the chip shortage that the manufacturing prowess of Taiwan has finally been on the map.
Right.
Which is good.
Yeah, so I guess reindustrialization is the key word that you mentioned, which we will talk about later. And then we have to talk about Liberation Day, President Trump's tariff plan.
The most beautiful
the most beautiful word. I remember reaching out to you the day after Liberation Day, and you shared a lot of insight with us, with our readers. And how do you interpret President Trump's shift, the emphasis on tariff? So is this a business move or is it a political move?
Well, I think it's both, actually. I mean, it is a business move from the sense that he has been talking about this topic for, God,
decades.
Since, 4 decades at least. So I think if you're looking at it from a business perspective, I think it does have strong business implication especially with regards to reshoring of manufacturing. And political move, I think that applies too, because when you negotiate about tariff and other trade barriers, then it is a political negotiation, right? But I mean, Taiwan has been seen on the news for decades too about, the import of American beef, American pork. So these negotiations takes a long time, and oftentimes we would say it's like kabuki is a theater that you will have some protests at home and etc. But at this moment, Trump is just fast forwarding all the negotiation by just putting a so-called tariff and on the table and forcing your hand to come negotiate with him in the U.S. instead of having trade representative taking God knows how long to settle an issue. So he wants to fast pace everything.
So I've been listening to numerous podcasts on those moves. And so also thank you for sharing a lot of podcasts with me. And I was able to hear from different sides. So the more liberal commentators would say that, he's going to upend the entire global economy. But other commentators would say that, okay, this is actually a very smart move. I think it was David Sachs who said that a few years ago, if I told you that all the countries would be very happy to embrace a 10% tariff, you would have called me a lunatic. But now, I think after Liberation Day, after the announcement of super high tariffs, all countries were very happy to
settle back at a 10% base, which he called a base tariff.
A base. Now it's going to become normal. But then what do you think is the end game here? Do you think the high tariffs can really drive manufacturing back to the U.S.? Would it really work because you're a businessman? Right?
No, I think you have to look at it sectors to sectors. But coming back to the overall labor force or the discourse that is happening in the U.S. right now, a lot of so-called upper class or elitist conversations. We need, for example, in the subject area, immigration, right? Because the U.S. has long depends on, you would call it seasonal labor, contract labor.
Mostly from Mexico, coming from Mexico?
Well, we're not going to say which countries they're coming from, right? Because they're coming from predominantly Central America.
Right.
And they represent a large part of the U.S. labor force, right?
The vegetables and fruits.
So who's going to, mow my lawn? Who's going to be picking the cottons? Who are going to be, the front? So
my nannies.
So labor force is an important topic here, right? And then you will come back and look again at, which industries require labor. I mean, it's the same issue that's facing Taiwan now, right? I mean, it's like we kind of look away from a lot of labor force at construction sites. We don't question where they're from,
workers.
or we don't look at their papers. I mean, the U.S. is definitely facing a similar situation with regards to labor force. So, I was talking to several friends there, like Massachusetts, Boston used to be a big hub for textile a century ago. And textile, as we know, is a very labor-intensive industry. And do we actually expect people to come back and make our jeans,
make T-shirts and jeans in Massachusetts?
And then not labor force, regardless of labor force, it is also a very high pollution industry, right? With regards to when you talk about process like dyeing, etc. So, are these the industries that you want to bring back to the U.S. again? Which I doubt, because it's not making economic sense. But at the same time, with the Trump's trying to bring industrialization back to the U.S., I strongly doubt that these are also the type of industry that he has on his mind.
Well, from the analysis, I have a feeling that he would prioritize tech-related goods, or let's say low-tech, for example, connected vehicles, cars. I believe he would want more cars built in the U.S. and maybe defense satellites. And how do you think?
So we need to look at it industry by industry. So, it is my personal belief that for the tariff he put on countries and the long list he had on his April 2nd Liberation Day, from my perspective, these are more negotiation tactics aiming at negotiating on the trade barriers each countries have against the United States. But in contrast, tariffs that he has already talked about since Trump 1.0, when continuing on through the Biden administration to Trump 2.0, such as steel, aluminum, and the automobile industries, and his previous negotiation on USMCA, I think those are more targeted, and of course then TSMC and chips. I think those are more targeted towards specific industry, which I would think are his ultimate goal. So it would be industry-specific reindustrialization. And most importantly, like you mentioned, automobiles, because him winning the election this time, a large part of it stems from labor unions in those states that
Rust Belt.
that decided to not endorse a Democrat. So this is the first time in, I believe, like 4 or 5 decades that they stood aside and not endorse a certain candidate. So I think he owes them a thank you.
He's going to look after them. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Jack. We're going to take a break now. When we come back, we're going to talk about what Taiwan's roles could be in the manufacturing renaissance in the U.S.
Most beautiful.
Yes, okay. Welcome back to the Taiwanology podcast. This is your host, Liu Guangyin from Taiwan's CommonWealth magazine. Today we have Jack Ho as our guest. He is the COO of Universal Cement Corporation, and he is also an expert in American politics.
Well, not an expert in it.
So we were just talking about your trip to Harvard and talk of industrial renaissance, manufacturing renaissance in the U.S. And I think it would be interesting for you to share your personal experience with Universal Cement. What has the company been like? And as I understood, in your operations in Taiwan, it's also experienced some kind of a renaissance in the past few years.
Yeah, so I'll start with, when I was in school and, when you want to go to interviews with consulting companies, there's a book called Case in Points that many people have to study, which are case studies. And these consulting companies will, give you sample cases to let you give an answer on what you would do facing certain business situations. And most of the time they would talk about, if there are some companies that are facing high cost, or there's some certain stores, some certain divisions that are not doing so well. And most of the time the answers you would give them is offshore that industry to offshore the manufacturing process to somewhere like China or Southeast Asia.
Lower cost countries.
Yeah, or, just close down the underperforming stores. And you've been seeing that in the US for God knows how long, the past 3 or 4 decades. But, coming back to Taiwan, and especially to the cement industry and southern Taiwan, which has also been very hard hit by deindustrialization and offshoring for the past decades to China and Southeast Asia.
Right, so it's the Rust Belt of
Taiwan.
The
Rust Belt of Taiwan. I had the opportunity to see these things firsthand. For example, we also closed down cement factories. And, what jobs were those people supposed to take after your factory closed down? They're either going to follow us to China, which we had a cement plant until we closed that down, 15 years ago. Or what jobs are they going to take locally? A lot of them just became farmers. And besides that, maintaining a factory is a very complicated business. It depends on a lot of your supply chain, also your partners in regards to maintenance, right? And when the factory closed down, these people also lose their jobs.
Right.
So I had the opportunity to experience this firsthand. And, when I'm at my factory, I speak to my colleagues and also our suppliers. And, they're glad that we're still around so everyone can still have business.
Right. So how come you're still around? What did you do?
Well, I think it is what, we would describe as corporate social responsibility maybe. And also there is still a need for these kind of industry to still
cement, concrete, and plasterboard.
Steel. And also, the basic manufacturing, which, Trump is talking about of bringing back to the U.S. or protecting. These are industries that you cannot just solely depend on import. Yeah, because, for example, of course, we all hope that this wouldn't happen if Taiwan will be engaged in a military conflict with who. If there's a naval blockade around Taiwan, then you can't import anything, right? So you still need these industries to still be around.
We still need to build things.
Yeah. So it was only until this past 10 years that we've seen a industrial renaissance in southern Taiwan, which has but a lot of these labor-intensive, high pollution industries have been replaced by TSMC and high-tech sector, especially it started all in Nanke and now in Kaohsiung. So then we saw a whole new supply chain getting built up in southern Taiwan, which, I would think is the same goal that the U.S. government is trying to achieve, but I think it's a good start for them. But of course, I think there are still many questions that face reindustrialization in the U.S., especially with regards to regulations and red tapes, which everyone struggle with. We struggle with that in Taiwan as well. But, I think they're always well-meaning, right, to make sure there are no pollution and labor, your colleagues are treated fairly, etc. But yeah, it's still a long road ahead.
So I think the story you just shared is an excellent testimony of what drives a manufacturing renaissance and infrastructure. So, for example, what happened in southern Taiwan in the past, I would say 5 or 6 years, pretty recent, is the start of TSMC fabs and also its subsequent supply chain. And so there are a lot of people who are moving there to work.
Yeah.
So they need more factories built, they need more residential projects built.
And that's giving us good business too.
Right. So that's there's more demand for cement, more demand for plasterboards, building materials. So I think it's a perfect time to go back to our topic here today, which is what would it really take for the U.S. to welcome a renaissance in manufacturing? What pieces have to come together for that to happen?
Well, I think they have to first realize what it takes to reindustrialize and bring manufacturing back. Yeah, I mean, in the short-term basis, like you've been seeing on the news with regards to automobile factories, they're just adding one more shift. So right now they have 2 shifts and they're going to make it into 3 shifts. And it would be easy for them to, adjust with regards to human resource. And yeah, you've also seen on the news that there are several plants that are currently not being used, and it would be probably easy to utilize those. Mm-hmm. But after that, if you really want to build up capacity, I think that's going to take a lot more work. For example, I've always been hearing my peers talk about, no one wants to work in the factory anymore. And which is true. I mean, the U.S. labor right now, especially the younger generation, they're much more used to, what we call like contract labor. So not contract labor, but, labor by choice, whether you want to be, delivering DoorDash, Uber driver, etc., or be an influencer. So,
okay.
Or work at a coffee shop. So do you actually expect them to work in a factory? But I think that mentality is for, the coastal folks. But in the industrial Midwest, if your family has a tradition of going to work in a factory, or
probably they would be willing.
Yeah, or they once worked in a factory, but they were laid off. I think it would be easy for them to get back into the factory. But then again, we're talking about which topic I was just discussing with you about, the regulations. So that is why there are certain efforts to revisit these regulations, or even, they're talking about scaling back those like EPAs and etc. I'm not saying they're bad, but I mean, of course, we can have certain discussions. But when it comes to a time that you need to scale up productions, then you need to discuss which regulations or which agency has to take a back seat and etc. I mean, again, I'm not saying they're bad because
they need to be improved and streamlined.
Yeah.
So you're saying that, okay, labor force maybe is one factor that we have to address, and second is government red tape.
Yeah.
But then I was just thinking the willingness of investors, because I think what drives investment decisions is always return of profit.
I know.
Right?
Just look at the stock price of TSMC. Yeah.
Right. So when you have to invest in a place where the operation costs are so much higher than other places, then people, the investors and the shareholders would expect your profits to be lower, and therefore your business would probably not be profitable anymore. So who would drive this change?
Trump. So that's why, I also mentioned to a friend of ours that the Trump administration basically gave the business community and these other countries an offer they cannot refuse. Because, if you just look at the business world and the investment world right now, everyone's going crazy.
Yeah, like I'm losing my money, we're losing all our money.
Yeah, so you have to give them a choice they cannot say no to and ask them not so nicely to consider investing in the US. Because, from my perspective, if I want to set up a sales office in the US, I think that's easier. But if I want to set up a factory in the US, I don't dare to at this moment.
So let's say if you're Tim Cook, and will you, in 10 years, will I be making most of my iPhones in the US?
No.
Okay, so how?
Yeah. No, they just have to find somewhere else to make him. But I'm sure he's having a very difficult time right now trying to readjust his production capability. Because, I'm sure most of their supply chain are still in China. So, Trump was very obvious saying that the window he gave to tech products from China from the tariff is a favor for Tim Cook, so people can still afford their iPhones. So, these are realistic questions everyone have to struggle with. And I don't think Foxconn wants to set up a factory in the US after what happened in Wisconsin, right?
So, okay, then my next question is, what kind of role can Taiwanese businesses play in helping the renaissance of manufacturing in the States? So we have seen some projects, right? So TSMC's fabs in Arizona and Global Wafers, and there are also some companies that are setting up shop in Michigan. So there's a Taiwanese company that makes auto lights. And also some company that starts making fasteners for cars. So it is possible for Taiwanese businesses to manufacture in the US, right? And what do you think, what makes them work?
Well, I think when we talk about these business, first, these companies, they are large corporations and they most likely already have footprint in China or other parts of the world. So I think you need to, again, like I said, one of the most important point here is we have to be very industry specific. So when we're talking about automobiles is, these supply chain are already very mature in the US. So if you want to, recently I have a friend who set up a new factory in Windsor, Ontario. That's Canada, which I'm sure they're going to be fine. These are just squabbling. But I think you have to be industry specific. And if you are taking over an existing facility, I think that's going to be much easier. So you already have something there. You don't have to start
permitting, hell.
You don't have to move turtles from a reservation, etc. So that's going to be much easier. So I think Taiwanese companies can definitely help over there. But moving away from that, I think, Taiwanese companies have been a very important partner to the global supply chain. So I'm sure I don't need to say this. You could interview many other business executives right now. They are working with their customers on where they should assemble their products next. It could be in Mexico. A lot of companies are going to Mexico, which, again, I'm also sure they're going to turn out fine. It's just, negotiation at this moment. So, it is very industry specific, and we need to look at where the supply chains currently are. And if there are existing facilities in the US that are available that Taiwanese company can synergize with, I'm sure many companies are going to look at that. Not just in the automobile industry. I also know there are companies in the steel aluminum industry that have merged companies in the US, right? So I think in the long run, again, this is already a topic of many discussion, that supply chain are going to gradually shift away from China, right? And we're going to be looking at where to go next, right? So I think Taiwanese industries are still going to play a very important part because we are a trusted partner of many US companies. So yeah, but I think just looking at where our customers want us to go.
Yeah, so we just follow footsteps. We're like
follow our great leader,
yes.
Donald Trump.
Great leader. I'm not sure if you're making a joke or not.
It is a joke.
Okay, right. So my final question is, if you are going to sit down for 5 minutes with a Taiwanese company CEO who is kind of pressured or asked nicely by his U.S. customer to go and manufacture in the U.S. and he or she is in panic mode, what would you tell that CEO?
Yesterday on my flight back, it was funny. I was sitting next to a guy. I'm not sure which company he works for, what industry is he in, but he's getting ready for a long flight to Asia. And he was talking on the phone to someone, and it was exactly what you were talking about. He was like, "Oh, we got to move this away from China. Do we need to postpone this order, etc.?" Yeah, he's basically in panic mode, and I feel bad for him. It's going to be a very long 12-hour flight back to Asia. So, but yeah, I think we need to, from my perspective as a Taiwanese company, we need to work very closely with our U.S. partner. If they want us to bring manufacturing to the U.S. back, they better be sure, right? Because it's not easy to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. And we got to look at, our cost structure again and whether or not, I'm sure these are topics that have been talked about. Who is going to bear the cost increase, right? And from my experience at this moment, U.S. companies are just telling their supply chain to suck it up.
Yeah, like that's going to work.
Well, yeah, and it's going to look at TSMC stock price, right? We just look at what is happening. I think it's going to be a very hard conversation that everyone's going to have, right? And especially where you're going to move your supply chain. So I think a lot of companies at this moment, include if I were in their position, I would totally do the same thing. Is just stay put for a while and see where things fall, right?
Or I believe when we interview some companies that have significant market in US, they all say that, okay, my products are still pretty competitive. We have some leverage when we talk with our clients, so they would have to share the costs, or the customers would have to bear the costs.
But I think it's a very complicated discussion because I think we have to be very industry specific. If you're talking about cement plant, steel plant, those are huge. They're not going anywhere, right? But if you're talking about small things with a long and intricate supply chain like electronic products, then it is possible that we can shift this process here, shift that process there. But, if you're talking about huge factories, they're not going to go anywhere. So I think ultimately someone just have to bear the cost, right? It's just that simple.
So I think it's still early days. Every minute there can be different things announced.
Yeah.
So we just live minute by minute, and let's see where this renaissance would take us.
Yeah,
okay.
I guess I would say the same.
Yes, so let's just stay put. Thank you very much, Jack, for coming into our studio.
My pleasure.
Very interesting conversation. Well, and that's a wrap for our show today. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review or shoot us an email. We'd love to hear your thoughts. For deeper insights into how Taiwan's manufacturing giants are reshaping the global landscape, please visit the CommonWealth English website. The next episode will be available May 27th. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts and stay tuned for more conversations. Talk to you soon.